After stabilizing the situation, he began to lift the administration capacity of the municipality to high levels. This has been evidenced by the fact that for 8 years, that's rare. For 8 years, the municipality obtained and maintained unqualified reports with 4 clean audits. The performance is a testimony of his administrative acumen. The performance illustrates his exceptional ability to work well with people and take the best out of them. It's none other than MEC Zolile Williams. Thank you.
Can we all stand to welcome the MEC?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Program Director. Thank you, Honorable Councillor, for the humbling introduction. Program Director, let me pass greetings to His Majesty, the King, Buyelekhaya Dalindyebo. Azwelbands. 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 Amakhosi onke obukumkani babathembu aphahle ukumkani and the broader family of the Abathembu nation. Honorable councillors of King Sabata Dalindyebo municipality, the chairperson of the board, the acting principal of this honorable campus, the heads of departments of various faculties, lecturers, the president and members of the Student Representative Council, the general student population and workers of our college, leaders, members and supporters of this college. Zonke indwalutho nezinqibamxhaka ezikhoyo kulomsitho ubaluleke kangaka. Please accept my greetings and my apologies this evening. It is a privilege for me to be invited by this college and the Dalindyebo family to come and speak about His Majesty, the King, Sabata, Jongumhlaba Dalindyebo, Jonguhlanga Dalindyebo, who is in fact my father-in-law traditionally. My leader in the ANC family, my king as an African. Although my traditional connections are with the Amampondomise clan, kuba mnandi ngudosini. Secondly, it is my honor to have the opportunity to address such a distinguished audience and talk about one of the esteemed monarchs who reigned upon the Abatembu nation from 1954 to 1986. Today, Unkosi uJonguhlanga would have been 94 years. And this day coincides with the launch of our government of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence and femicide. Make ndimkhahlele uNkosi uJonguhlanga ndimnike isidima sifaneleyo. Ajonguhlanga. 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 Firstly, I think it is imperative to provide the context and the background about who we are talking about. Please allow me to briefly outline the genealogy of this revolutionary king of our movement. In the 19th century, Ngubengcuka, one of the greatest monarchs who united the Abatembu tribe, he passed on in 1832. When I was discussing the king, he was saying with the king, he was saying, the kingship is a creature of custom and not a creature of law. And true to that principle, in terms of the custom, Unkosi Ngubengcuka, he had wives from the principal royal house, the great house from which the heir is selected. I also got some education from Ikumkani as we were sitting Pakuye Ebodwe. The right-hand house and the Ikriba, which is referred to as the left house. And these definitions and descriptions are made in order to define properly as we normally distort currently, as to from which house does an heir apparent gets chosen. So that ngabikho confusion in the royal family. That's why ezi zinto kunyanzeleka uba zichazwe ubani yeyiphi esiniya kwenye, so that there's no confusion. Nkosi Mthikaka, the eldest son of the great house, succeeded Nkosi Ngubengcuka, and among his sons were Ngangelizwe, Matanzima and Fanda from the minor house. Nkosi uJonguhlanga became the paramount chief who ruled Abatembu from 1954, and he was the grandson of Nkosi Ngangelizwe, a senior, which is fundamental to Daliwonga Matanzima, the former chief minister of the Transkei government. In his book, Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom, I quote the following. After the untimely death of Nkosi Jongilizwe in 1920, his son, Nkosi Jonguhlanga, okay. All right, Kumkani. It just typifies that we, thina bangasuki kwi-royal family, we distort this king and Nkosi. Kumkani, yes, that's it. Nkosi, Nkosi Kumkani. Nelson Mandela, upon the untimely death of Kumkani Jongilizwe in 1920, his son Kumkani Jonguhlanga, the infant of the great wife, was too young to ascend to the throne. Utata kakumkani. A dispute arose as to which of the Dalindyebos should be selected to succeed ukumkani. Nelson Mandela says his father was consulted and his father recommended uJongintaba on the ground that he was the best educated at that time, and Mandela's father argued that King Jongintaba would be a fine custodian of the crown and an excellent mentor to ikumkani uSabata iseyanga ngelo xesha. The recommendation was controversial because King Jongintaba's mother was from a lesser house, but the recommendation of Mandela's father was ultimately accepted in order for Utata uJongintaba to mentor King Sabata Dalindyebo. King Jongintaba was a guardian who raised Nelson Mandela at Mqhekezweni, a man Nelson Mandela described as a steady presence upon whom all eyes gazed. Abathembu ke udla ngokutsho uking athi bahle bayabukeka amadoda sebathenjini. So uking Jongintaba kuthiwa wayengutata on a presence. Uba xa engena, everyone would gaze and look upon him because of his stature, how he looked. He had an intelligent face, and he raised Nelson Mandela, K.D. Matanzima, George, and King Sabata Dalindyebo until they reached adulthood. The early life of King Sabata whilst he was born on the early hours of the morning at Mqhekezweni to Indlovukazi umama uNovoti, one of the 3 wives of King Jongilizwe, he never saw his father. As King Jonguhlanga was born 4 months after his father passed on. Upon the death of King Jongilizwe, his brother, King Jongintaba, became the regent. It was at Jongintaba's great place in Mqhekezweni that King Sabata was born under the midwifery of Mama Ndlovukazi no England, Jongintaba's wife. When King Sabata was still a young lad, King Jongintaba took him to the family of Falom Gudlwa at Qumang near Engcobo. According to Mr. Matiwan, the decision to take King Sabata to the Mgudlwas in Engcobo was described as follows by Mr. Matiwan. Mgudlwa was the university of the Abatembu royalty. Even K.D. Matanzima grew up there. The idea was that the King Sabata must grow up in a proper way, away from alcohol and wild behavior. There, at the Mgudlwas, he would get inspiration for education and would attend church. The family history confirms that the Mgudlwas lived up to this reputation. In the first instance, he did not allow King Sabata to attend concerts at night. He sent King Sabata to one of the best missionary schools at the time, which was called Clarkbury. After completing Form 1 in 1945, King Sabata proceeded to another famous missionary school called Hilltown in Fort Beaufort, where he enrolled for Form 2. And after Hilltown, King Sabata went to Bensonvale College in Stakespruit to study for teaching. So if we are iqaphela, Hilltown ne Cape College zikwindawo enye nobutitshala ngathi ndilandele ekhondweni apha kumkani. It is said that King Sabata never went beyond the then junior certificate. He dropped out of school, and Mgudlwa was not pleased as a disciplinarian. Now, Mgudlwa was not happy that King Sabata dropped out of school and never completed formal education. He believed that King Sabata should possess good education as a future paramount chief of the Abatembu nation. He was happy with KD, who completed his studies and became the shining star within the Mtikaka genealogy. From the early age, King Sabata never liked oppression. King Sabata never liked oppression and strict rules that deprived people freedom. He, like his cousin Nelson Mandela, detested apartheid in all its guises, as well as the Bantustan system for its contemptuous treatment of black people. On the other hand, K.D. Matanzima collaborated with the Pretoria regime and embraced it. Now the family of the Abatembu is beginning to break apart, because now one praises the regime and the other detests it. So the contradiction within the Abatembu family starts to germinate. At some point, when King Sabata was still in Klagbari, he wrote a letter to the magistrate fighting to be given freedom like other lads, as Mgudlwa was too strict. Unkosi njengoba kusithiwa akahambe iziconcert abanye abantwana bayaya, wabhalela umagistrate uba no lo tata makandikhulule nam ndiyafuna uhamba ndiye kwabanye abantwana. So that was the beginning of the fighting spirit within His Majesty King Sabata. The stringent regime of Mgudlwa did not seem to have repressed King Sabata's free-spiritedness. The youthful King Sabata never wanted to be addressed by his royal name. And this we see as the first signs of humility from royalty. Nankwako echincha khona uKing Sabata. Uba njengokuba elapha esikolweni abamaziyo sebesithi kumkani, and it does not like that. Funeka abizwe ngegama abanye abantu ababizwa ngawo apha esikolweni, angabizwa ngeligama likaJonghlanga lobukhosi. So he wanted to be equal to other kids and not be named with a different name. Now, the lesson here is the lesson of humility, where whilst he's an heir, whilst he's got traditional blood, traditional leadership blood, this royalty has humility to say, no, don't call me Jonghlanga. Currently, the leadership we have in society actually demands respect from the people. And it's not respect that comes from them, but it's demanded. Uba anitanga MEC, andisiboni ndi-right ndinguye MEC. Now, the contrary is that King Jonguhlanga shows humility and wants to be the same as the people he is living with. And that's a fundamental lesson we must learn about the current attributes that the current leadership corps has during these current times or contemporary times. Rather, he preferred to be part of the masses and wanted his peers to refer to him jokingly as Mr. Balfour. And yazi beyithatha ke le nto ka Mr. Balfour. Wayengafuni leyo uba kuthiwa Jonghlanga, mabambize as Mr. Balfour to hide his royalty. While he was at Clarkbury, there was a protest action in 1944, which led to some students being expelled. And King Sabata escaped expulsion. This was later interpreted as favoritism since he was from the royal family and because he was at the forefront of the student protest. If you look at his character, he challenges Utata Mgudlwa. He does not want to be called royalty. There's a strike action at school. Obviously, you wouldn't fail to find him as part of that. But he was protected from that, and he protested being protected because he was leading the strike at school. And that's another sign of a leader who wants to be sharing the pain of his communities. Juxtapose that with the current situation where leaders would live in pomp and luxury whilst poverty is full in society. And these are lessons we need to learn about this royalty that we are talking about today. Another lesson here is for leaders to understand that the material conditions which affect the people are important to be understood by the leader. And a leader must close any social distance between the people and the leadership. Today, we respond to people's concerns when people are protesting. And we find at every moment, King Jonguhlanga is with the people so far. We don't find him far from them. Instead, who is a leader? He is a leader who is part of the pains that are enjoyed or endured by his people. According to Ms. Nomputuko Mqhayi, who was in the same circle as King Sabata, while still a young girl, she described King Sabata as a jolly good fellow and a socialite. He liked to mingle with the masses. He mixed well with people of different age groups, from youngsters to professional urban guys and old men from the villages. So he could cut across young, old, he could cut across in terms of relationships. Nomputuko remembers the king being fond of frequenting places like Kwanogwashu in an area called Etolofien. People's person. Where the people are, the king is there, is around the people. An old section of Ngangelizwe, which is a working class township. Kakhle kakhle, njengomuntu wasebukhosini, he did not need to go to Ngangelizwe and so on, if he wanted not to. But the king would be there with the people, working class, mingling around them. That was a popular area for people to have drinks and braai. He was a socialite. King Sabata was also a regular at Jubilee. He would come to Jubilee riding a bicycle amidst a band performing all types of music. Now, there's a good story here that he was fond of girls. He was a hunk. He was a hunk. And girls who knew that he was a king would throw themselves all over him. And now, he had a way with words. He spoke so eloquently that girls found him to be like a magnet. Once they pay attention to him when he speaks. So, ebenendlela othetha, enoburharha, eyenza into yobana amameleke. And some of these things that are being described about King Jonguhlanga, I think siyazibona somewhere. Andifuna ukugwetywa. The free-spiritedness in King Sabata's personality was interwoven with a strong social consciousness. He founded and sponsored a soccer team called the Tembo Royals of Umtata. And this is a historical fact that we have not taken seriously, that we have allowed the Tembo Royals to fade away and die. And something really needs to be done around this history, because this team was one of the best teams and a competitive team in the whole of Transkei. Most of the best players of that team who played for Tembo Royals, like Visat Lusiti, described King Sabata as a keen soccer fan and a good sponsor of the team. During those days, soccer sponsors were very scarce. His social activities embedded and entangled him within his people and community. He mixed easily with the masses from different backgrounds and age. He was approachable and easily related to any ordinary man on the streets. He did not lead a sheltered life, but experienced everything ordinary people were going through. Because of his easy lifestyle, his distractors within the family used that as a weapon to object his ascendancy to the throne later in 1954. That's where now King Sabata, because yena kavalelekanga kwi royalty, he is easy within the people that his father has led. Now some within the family say, Lona akabufanelanga bukumkani, and this must then was then raised as a controversy when he was to ascend to power in 1954. We go deep because this was a revolutionary. Karl Marx argues that a leader of the revolutionary struggle is shaped by an understanding of the primacy of the structure of society and the contradictory forces involved in the society. In this, Marx produced the concept of historical materialism, whose theory is dialectical materialism, which exposes the contradictions caused by social needs in society. Therefore, without King Sabata's interaction with the people, he would not understand the social contradictory forces at play and would therefore be on the periphery of history as an ahistorical royalty. This is why Marx is saying to understand society, you need to understand the material conditions at play within that particular society. Now, this is King Jonguhlanga at best, because wherever he is, he understands the challenges that confront society, and therefore, this shapes his life orientation towards the struggle for liberation. When he was to go to the initiation school, it became a titanic struggle. He wanted to go there at 18 years. Wayefuna uya sena 18 because there was conservativeness at that time. Kwakufuneka noko inkwenkwe ibe ndala iqine. Yathi xa engasiwa kwi-18 years wayenkundleni uba ufuna uya pha yena, ufuna uyokoluka. But abathembu bathi no. Akakabikho right to go now. Uyokoluka sena 26 years against his will. Abathembu had great expectations that King Sabata's inauguration would restore the esteem and standing of their party,
which within a short space of time turned around and transformed it into well-run municipality. Before he took over, the municipality was plagued
or that the chieftaincy suffered under King Jonguhlanga and Dalindyebo. King Sabata owned a car, something that was rare during those days. So So he owned a car, and these historians write as something that was rare to be seen during those days. His political activism, King Sabata Dalindyebo hated injustice. He did not like the undermining of the royalty by the British government. Ndivile ke ngoku bendipha komkhulu uba uyimentionile ukumkani pha uba he does not subscribe to the British government. And here his father did not subscribe to the British government. He was clear about that. Dalindyebo became the regent at a time when the British colonial state was implementing the notorious rehabilitation scheme, which included culling of livestock. This proved unpopular amongst the people living in rural areas. And KD cooperated very well with the apartheid government. He urged Abathembu to obey the laws of the colonial state. And this is the crux of disagreement between King Sabata and KD. And this started the conflict. Because those who were there during that time, there's a law that was created by apartheid, which is called the Glen Grey Act. And the intention of the Glen Grey Act was to take away African men from their livelihoods in rural areas, reduce their livestock so that they cannot be self-sustainable, and force them to go and work in the mines, as it is still happening today. King Jonguhlanga was against that policy, because that policy, the effects of that policy today have obliterated the African family. Abantwana bakhula benganatata. What has called a social ill today is what King Jonguhlanga fought against. However, his cousin accepted it and wanted people to obey. And now, you can count every week how many taxis get out of Mthatha, taking people to the mines. This is what King Jonguhlanga tried to stop, because the people were self-sufficient during that period. And this obliterated the African family of that time. And you can see the foresight of King Jonguhlanga, that he was quite a deep theorist in understanding the evolution of society. The impact of this act changed the way of African life, and the revolutionary monarchy of King Jonguhlanga understood this plan, and he was forthright in fighting against it to the detriment of his own royal family. Because once he started to fight directly with apartheid, now that's why kwaqala uba i-kingship yakhe i-undermined by the apartheid state because of his frontal way of challenging the system. His cousin's Democratic Party promulgated various legislations that oppressed the Abatembu nation. One of the legislation was the Bantu Authorities Act 28 of 1936, which compelled traditional leaders to report to a white magistrate. And the Population Registration Act of 1926, which forced people of Transkei to have documents called the Book of Life. And these were things that were against how King Sabata saw the society, but his cousin was actually introducing laws upon laws that were restricting the Abatembu nation from free movement. King Dalindyebo and Knowledge Guzana formed their own political party called the New Democratic Party in the 60s. And he immediately suffered harassment once he did that. And detentions under the Matanzima's regime were the order of the day. Matanzima's iron fist rule continued for the whole decade of the 70s. He never tolerated opposition. The arrest and the sentencing of Paramount Chief Dalindyebo spelled the end of opposition parties in the Transkei. And King Sabata Dalindyebo was detained and later charged towards the end of 1979. Azolbans. His detention was met with disbelief and led to protest in the entire Transkei, because now King Sabata waziwa ngabantu bonke. Xa ebanjwa ngo-1979, iTranskei was ungovernable because people wanted their king out of prison. According to the charge sheet, he was alleged to have undermined the authority of K.D. Matanzima, who was the president of Transkei. King Sabata was accused of uttering the following words in a rally held in Qumbu on the 30th of June 1979. He said, I quote, "I am the paramount chief of this Matanzima. I am a senior to Matanzima in rank and by birth, and shall remain so until the day of judgment. I was born senior. I am his elder brother. I am his God. That's how the king presented his memorandum. And he said, Transkei has accepted independence on the terms dictated to by the white Boers. And he said, Matanzima lived in luxury while the people live wayethetha nje ke, in excreta. The authorities repossessed his house in Mthatha and gave it to one of Matanzima's concubines. Kwathatha indlu kakumkani yanikwa inkazana ngurhulumente. The people of Transkei were oppressed except the president and his ministers. And he said, the Republic of Transkei is a pigsty. And he was charged for violating and injuring the dignity of the head of state of Transkei, for making statements that were repugnant to the constitutional independence of Transkei, subverting or interfering with the authority of the state of Transkei. His trial was taken away from Mthatha to Port St. John's from the 19th of September 1979 to make the trial very far from the people, because the people were toying against the arrest of the king. So they had to take the case to Port St. John's, bebaleka abantu. And the charges that he carried, that he was charged with, carried a death sentence. Big crowds attended the trial of His Majesty in Port St. John's, and there was a huge police present, and still in court, the king referred to Matanzima as a puppet of the apartheid government. A court. That's how steadfast he was against apartheid. Attempts were made for Nelson Mandela to come and testify in support of the king, but their chances of appearance were limited because no Mandela utye le nto ityiwe nguking Sabata naye ubanjelwe ezakhe zalo mzabalazo wabantu, so he couldn't even come to the trial. At the end of the trial, the king was sentenced to a fine of 700 rand or 18 months in prison, on condition that he did not commit the contravention of Section 71 of the Terrorism Act. The cabinet voted for his removal. This signified the end of King Dalindyebo's official political career. Kwathiwa makanikwe uphumaphele kule mhlaba ayinkosi kuwo. The king is given uphumaphele. He was adored by the people, and his cousin Matanzima was feared. He was banished, and his homesteads were destroyed at Mpunzi village. Later, the king fled to exile in Zambia, where he joined up with the ANC. King Sabata escaped from Bumbane out of the country in 1980. Look at how he was escaping. He was hidden at the back of a bakkie, ukumkani. wayekhwelwe kwi-bakery van, escapiswa from the ruthless Matanzima to go out of the country. An ANC underground veteran called China of Kobololo arranged for the king to skip the country. They crossed to Lesotho, where the king was received by Krisani and General Lihlonolo Muloi. A cadre from Maseru had this to say about the king. The king lived with in Krisani's house for some time. Krisani made the king stay very comfortable. They understood each other because Chris came from Tofimvaba, next to Engobo, and they shared experiences about their rural background, and they were very fond of each other. After the house of Krisani was attacked by apartheid agents in 1980 in Lesotho, the ANC, under instruction of Oliver Tambo, had to move the king because apartheid, I say, plan to mamaka wherever he is. And the Lesotho base camp of MK was instructed to move the king away from Lesotho to Mozambique on the instruction of Oliver Tambo. In Maputo, the king narrowly escaped another attack from the South African Defense Force after the signing of the Nkomati Accord. Nkomati Accord was saying all the frontline states should not allow MK cadres to be part of those states. If they do so, those states will be attacked by the South African government. So the king had to run away from Mozambique again because of the Nkomati Accord. What should we learn from the willingness of King Jonguhlanga to engage in a spirited fight against his cousin in order to protect his nation? We must remember that as a king, he could have conspired with his cousin Matanzima to oppress the people as instructed by the apartheid regime. This would have made him to live a good life. However, his political convictions were not about his material benefits for a life of pomp and pleasure. Today, our experiences of a leadership, ndithetha ngathi, I'm part of that leadership. The experience is that of assuming state authority, steal as much as you can to get rich wrongly, perpetuate crime and corruption. But here is the son of the soil. He had all the chances to say, "Ndizawuhlala phansi sitye noMatanzima." But he chose us, he chose the people against glitz and glamour and greed. So the lesson to the students and young people that are here is that these are giants whom we stand on their shoulders because they sacrificed everything for us to enjoy the freedom we are enjoying today. That is King Jonguhlanga that was representing this. This would have made him, I've said that, contrary to our current situation, where everyone, especially those in leadership, would throw away their principles for a piece of silver. This happens on the backdrop of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. King Jonguhlanga respected his principles, even if they contradicted his own flesh and blood. He was a principled man. Ebengathi ngenxa yegazi azitshintshe principles. U-black ngu-black, u-white ngu-white. That's it to King Jonghlanga. The life of this revolutionary monarch of the Abatembu nation provides us with a Marxist understanding of the social structure of society. King Jonghlanga used the power of culture to progressively mobilize the Abatembu nation against the injustices of the apartheid regime and the Transkei regime. His clarity of thought went beyond his time. Since some of us still lack understanding of the power that is concealed in culture, we still lack understanding of the power of culture. And this, the king understood deeply, beyond his time. And even today, some of us do not understand the power concealed in culture, in the superstructure of society. This is how deep the king was in understanding where we come from. The king was well received within the ranks of MK in Zambia. And he quickly built a rapport within the ANC leadership. He connected well with Oliver Tambo. His humility made him to relate well with everyone. His down-to-earth personality helped him to cope with the conditions in exile, which were less ideal for a person of his stature. He never relented. Njengokuba efuna uba phakathi kwabantu, inkokeli ngelinye ixesha e-exile zazikhetha uba maziye ngaphesheya zingabikho namajoni. But the king, even there, he chose to be with the soldiers and never wanted to be in England or anywhere else because of his love for the people. One of the cadres says the king ate with us as though we were not his subjects. Napha ebenikwa inhlonipho, but king would always be part of the cadres of the ANC. He fitted in well in the ANC, and he trained us to keep our cultural traditions diverse as we were in the camps. The power of culture, he still continues with it. The king made fiery speeches on Radio Freedom. He spoke in a very powerful isiXhosa and sent the message to onomgogwana bamabhulu, omathanzima nezicaka zakhe. Kwakho la radio ye-ANC, kwakuthiwa Radio Freedom. The king would address there in Xhosa on Radio Freedom. During the Cabe Conference of the ANC in 1985, he remarked that the ANC was being too cautious in fighting apartheid like iqaba. This is where the friendship between himself, bebe bathathu, King Jonghlanga, Chris Hani, and Steve Tshwete, that three. They were problematic in exile because they wanted amajoni MK makaze South Africa kuzoliwa. Now, in this conference in 1985, King Jonghlanga is addressing uTambo. Tambo is chairing the conference, he is addressing him. Uti, iqaba will try to fight the enemy whilst wearing a blanket with nothing underneath. He will be holding onto the blanket to avoid exposing his nakedness, whilst the other man is beating him. Uthi uNkosi kuTambo, nisigcine apha asiye emfazweni. Singathi siliqaba elombethe ingubo lihambaze. While sisibethwa ngulo mntu asiyeke ingubo sityobe nathi. Instead sigade uzigquma. Kanti funeka sithatha ingubo siyiphose pha singene emfazweni because sifacene namabhulu. And this is a story MKKers would always fondly talk about when they talk about the king. In our training, they will tell us about how King Jongklang was frustrated with the ANC not sending military forces to South Africa to fight, and how he was passionate about it. And babe supportana ke le three yalapha Eastern Cape, Chris, Steve, and King Jongklang. It is only after throwing away the blanket, then when Kaba is able to charge against his opponent. The moral of the story was that the ANC had to throw away caution and fight the enemy, because the ANC was very cautious, because Namapulu are powerful at that time. So the ANC wouldn't want to start a civil war and then we have challenges. So it was cautious. King was saying, Masiolwane. King Sabata's militancy, coupled with a sense of humor, made him very popular amongst the youth in exile. They called him Comrade King. Tambo and Hani always consulted with him when serious decisions were to be taken in exile. Late in 1985, after the Kwabe conference, the king suffered diabetes. His health deteriorated. King Sabata eventually succumbed to the illness in 1986 while in exile. The ANC leadership gave him a fitting farewell. Inkosi uKing Jongklang uswelekele exile. Ungcatya ngamakheda akanikwa irespect emfaneleyo emhlabeni wakhe. And this is the moral of a revolutionary monarch that ends up dying for the people of South Africa outside his own people. That's the determination of steel that we find in King Jongklang. Babemkhahlela amakheda xa ebekwa. And what happened was that even though he was supposed to be buried in his own land, his cousin Matanzima was refusing, stopping him from being brought back. Umoyika nangoku seswelekile. Stopping that makangazongcwatywe lapha. And it was a struggle. And he was buried in Lusaka in 1986. And in 1989, after General Bantu Holomisa had taken over the power in Transkei, the king's body could be exhumed and he was brought back home and he got a dignified funeral in Bumbana. I'm concluding with the principles of His Majesty. The Majesty was a brave, principled man who did not change his mind for fear. He lost his father at a very young age. His ascendancy to his throne was marred with many obstacles. He only went to initiation against his will when he wanted to go there earlier at the age of 26. After his ascendancy to the Tembu throne, he led charges against all the acts that Matanzima introduced. He was persecuted by his own cousin, but he never surrendered. He opposed the Bantustan system until he lost his life. He suffered immensely under the Bantustan system. He fought against undermining of the traditional authority where those authorities must report to a white magistrate. He played a pivotal role in sustaining the rural resistance against the Matanzima regime and his collaborators in Pretoria. As a symbol of resistance against injustices, his personality connected magically with the people, and he emulated his predecessors among the African royalty in the African continent. His legacy is a stern rebuke to the collaborators. His heritage is a monument that will stand the test of times for generations of freedom fighters to come. He played a pivotal role in the National Executive Committee of the ANC in exile. He was the one who bandages the wounds of young soldiers in exile. That's how the king lowered himself in exile. He was isolated, but he never changed his principle and his standpoint. He hated repression with passion. He loved his people. He gave an unforgettable call to action at the Cabo Conference that turned the destiny of the liberation struggle. That's why kwakukho lando kutwa make South Africa ungovernable. Isuka kunkutonghlanga. Make South Africa ungovernable. That's how influential he was in driving the people's struggle. Ngo-1986, sasiphambene thina, based on that message from Tambo, esithi make South Africa ungovernable. And abantu ababesithi Tambo, we want to fight. King Jonguhlanga was one of those, and he wanted a rolling struggle to shake the apartheid regime to its core. That's why within a period of 8 years, Mandela was released from prison. Whilst uJongintaba ebekwe engcwabeni, uJonghlanga ebekwe engcwabeni. This is a life of a revolutionary par excellence. King Dalindyebo is one leader who must never be deleted in the memory bank of the people. His contribution to the revolution is incalculable. The Crown Prince, who went to train as a normal soldier and listened to the instruction from army commanders of Umkhonto weSizwe. He was in Kalulama, Malanje, in Angola. If you ask cadres of the ANC about the strongest camp that we ever had, they will tell you about Angola. That's where King Jonguhlanga was. A king who endured the difficult vagaries of the Angolan jungles for his people to be stripped of the yoke of oppression. A king who never relented. Ati amajoni Umkhonto weSizwe. Only 2 people in the army shared the sicknesses with the soldiers. uKhrisani, when he died, wayenento engathi ngamaqhakuva phansi kwamehlo. uJongihlanga had the same thing under the skin ngenxa yokutya kwase-exile. And I'm saying, his down-to-earth personality, he could have easily said to Oliver Tambo, Tambo, ndifuna uye England. But Jonguhlanga said, no, I'm here to fight the people's struggle. The lesson we can learn from King Sabata Dalindyebo as we approach the 55th National Conference of the ANC is the lesson of selflessness and putting the people first and be passionate about their development. That's how this legend we're talking about has presented himself in the ANC